Missy and I were the storytellers during Vacation Bible School, and each night we had a different Bible story, and the kids participated in this story. So we're going to do Jesus Calms the Storm today. So kids, come on up. Okay, you stand right here. Come right down here. Come down here we're starting the story down here. Okay. Okay, is this one? Okay. Okay. This is on calming the sea. Okay. Now, there was a great crowd of people that came near the Sea of Galilee to hear Jesus teach to them. And Jesus just loved to tell them about God's love because it is so big. Let's all spread our hands. How big is God's love? And they were excited to see Jesus. And come here, Jack. Jack's going to be Jesus today. Come over here.
Don't forget me.
Well, I'm not going to forget you. You got a part too, okay? So stand up. So everybody just kind of crowded with Jesus and wanted to get really close to him. And he had no place to go. So what do you think he did? He went and got in the boat. Now, only Jesus gets in the boat right now. Let's sit back here. Okay, and you guys sit down here because you're on the shoreline. And everybody was listening to Jesus preach. And he was teaching them about God all day long. It was just all day, everything he was saying. And they stayed and they listened. And near the end of the day, when it was time to go home, Jesus said to his friends, the disciples, you're going to be the 2 disciples. He said, let's go over to the other side of the sea.
Let's go to the other side of the sea.
So they got into the boat. Okay. And Jesus was really tired because he had been preaching all day. And so let's all yawn. And stretch because we were really tired. And Jesus went back in the back of the boat and put his head on the cushion, and he fell asleep. And so they took the anchor and they brought it into the boat. Pretend we have an anchor. Okay. And the breeze started just blowing the boat out to the sea. Was really nice. And all of a sudden the breeze changed into a big wind and the waves started getting higher and higher. You guys are the waves. Get the waves and blow them higher and higher. And the rain came and it started to come up on the boat and it started going into the boat. And what happens when water gets into a boat? It sinks, and they were rocking back and forth and back and forth. And they didn't know what they were going to do. And maybe they took the mast and took it down to see if that would help. Or maybe they had some buckets and they started bailing out the boat. But that didn't help. So they went over to Jesus and they said, Jesus, wake up.
Jesus, wake up.
Don't you care that we're drowning?
Don't you care when that we're drowning?
And so Jesus sat up and he looked around and he stood up and he said,
Peace be still.
And everything was calm and the waves stopped. They were amazed, looked surprised and amazed. Jesus had told the waves and the sea to stop, and they obeyed him. Wow. And Jesus said to them, why were you afraid?
Why are you afraid?
Don't you trust me?
Don't you trust me?
And they just could not believe that Jesus did that. And they said, who is this man?
Who is this man?
That the waves and the sea obey him.
That the waves and the sea obey him.
Wow. And so one of the things we can learn from this story is that Jesus can do anything. This is God's word by story for God's people. Thanks be to God. Good job, kids. You can go back to your parents.
Thank you to our storytellers, to our song leaders, to everybody that was part of VBS. Something that was kind of hard to see because of all the VBS stuff is we've got a new boat to add to the Mount Moriah fleet. And I want to thank Alan Bauer for putting this together for us and for Bridget in creating the ocean that the boat is on. It's a great way for us to recognize and to celebrate this story. So thank you to you as well. Would you all pray with me? O Spirit of the living God, fall fresh upon us, so that when you say, peace, be still, we will be. Amen. Now, for some of you who grew up here in Ohio, you might find this hard to believe, but where I grew up in the Texas Panhandle, we had rivers and they didn't have any water in them. They were just beds where when the rains would come, they would fill up and we would have water in our rivers for a while, but then about 24 hours after the storms were done, all the water was gone and it was just a dry riverbed again. So for me, even after 18 years in Ohio, to be able to look out and see the Ohio River always with water is like a miracle to me every day. But because of those storms that would fill my rivers growing up, I learned to appreciate a rainstorm, especially if I were inside and staying dry. But there's just something really fascinating about being inside and hearing the rain pounding on the roof and the winds blowing through the trees, the lightning flashes and the of the thunder. And I just loved that. But every so often, those rainstorms would become a little bit bigger than I really was comfortable with. Sometimes the wind would start to really blow, and those trees would really start to whoosh, and the thunder would be really, really loud, and the lightning would be like right directly on top of me, and then the sirens would go off saying, tornado, tornado, and we'd all have to retreat. Now, I didn't have basements growing up. We retreated to the bathroom and put a mattress over our heads, sitting in the tub. I grew up with 5 people in my family. That was a really crowded tub. So sometimes the storm could get a little bit crazier, a little bit more dramatic than I really wanted. And so we realized that sometimes storms are fun and sometimes storms are fierce. Well, the storm that we read about through our kids today is an example of that latter kind of storm, the storm that is really scary. Now, what's interesting about this story is everything that led up to it. As it was alluded to, Jesus had spent all day teaching to the people and healing people's diseases and taking care of all of those many hundreds, if not thousands of people's needs. And it's the end of the day and he's ready to have some downtime. Now, there are different ways that we can describe our personalities, and one of the ways that personalities can be described is whether one is an extrovert or an introvert. Extroverts love crowds. They like to be in the middle of all the action, and they get energy from the interaction and the engagement that they have when they're with other people. Introverts, on the other hand, can handle a crowd, but after a while, an introvert must get away from the crowd because the crowd drains their energy, and they need to be alone to recharge. And I think based on this story and several other stories that Jesus might perhaps have been an introvert. He was able to engage and respond to people, but he also wanted his downtime. And so at the end of a very long day of ministering to people and being pressed in on every side, he says, let's get in the boat and go to the other side. Now Jesus, growing up, was a carpenter, which meant that he knew things about wood, and in Jesus' day he also would have known things about stone. Carpenters dealt both with wood and with stone, and so he would have been able to tell you how to put a chair together, how to put a house together. But when it comes to water and lakes, that wasn't Jesus' background. However, for many of his disciples, Peter, James, John, Andrew, these guys knew the lake. They knew the water. They grew up fishing the Sea of Galilee. So they knew something about how that lake would do. And so when Jesus says, let's go to the other side in the evening, you would have thought somebody who knew the lake and knew the situation would have pulled Jesus aside and said, you know, Jesus, I know you want to get away, but let me tell you something about how things work on this body of water. You see, when the sun goes down and the air cools off, all this moisture comes up off the lake. And since this lake is below sea level and is surrounded by all these hills and mountains, when the hot, dry air coming from the desert to the east meets all of the cool, moist air on the lake, it makes things get rather crazy sometimes. Maybe we ought to just hunker down and stay here this evening. That's what one of them could have said to Jesus, but they didn't. They knew there was a possibility of winds and weather problems, but they did it anyway because Jesus said, let's go to the other side. And so they get into the boat and they cast off, and Peter and the rest of them must have had faith of some kind, thinking that we'll make it over there before the winds get bad. And probably at first things went well. They're going along and making it, and the waves are just a little bit kind of gentle. Jesus, being tired, he likes a waterbed, and so he falls asleep in the back of the boat. But as they're going along, the wind picks up some more, and the waves start to get a little bit higher. It's not quite so gentle rocking anymore, and so Peter says, trim the sail. And they trim the sail so there's not quite so much catching of the wind. That kind of settles the boat down a little bit more. But then the wind keeps going in more, and the waves get higher and higher. And before they know it, they feel like they're on a roller coaster that never ends, and there's no track to hang on to. And so now they're up and they're down, and they're up and they're left and they're right, and they're going all around, and they start to get worried. Even the fishermen who know this lake. And so Peter says, batten it down and bail like crazy. And so there they are, trying to keep things going, doing everything that they know how to do, and the winds just keep getting higher, the waves keep getting broader, the troughs keep getting deeper, and they're looking up and seeing the waves, and they're looking down and seeing the troughs, and they're worried that they're going to be overwhelmed. And where's Jesus? He's still asleep. Now, I don't know about you, but if I fall asleep in the car while somebody's driving, as soon as they make one turn, I'm awake again. That change in motion startles me out of my slumber. So how Jesus is able to stay asleep through all of this is one of those strange aspects to this story, because Jesus is going up and down and side to side, and he's still asleep. Now, these disciples are panicking. They're not just afraid, they are panicked, they are terrified, and they go back to Jesus and they shake him awake. Now, it makes you wonder, what kind of shaking do they do? Because if he's not waking up just from this, what did they do to wake him up? But they wake him and he sits up and they say, Lord, don't you care that we're drowning? Thinking that he doesn't care. Thinking that's the only reason that he's still asleep, is that he has no clue, he doesn't have any care, and if they die, that's it. And Jesus looks at them. And I think as he rubs the sleep from his eyes, and he feels the waves, and he sees the winds, he gives them a look like, come on, guys. And then he rebukes the waves. Now, I think it's interesting that Mark doesn't tell us what Jesus said to the waves. It just says he rebuked them. We only know what he said to the wind, peace, be still. And then suddenly, everything was still. The waves stopped, the wind died, and it's all calm. And then Jesus turns around and says, what gives, guys? Do you still have no faith? And they're like, dude, you just calmed the ocean. Whoa, who is this guy? Now, what's really interesting is that in our modern scientific enlightened era, there have been people who've tried to explain away this miracle and the other miracles of Jesus. And there was one guy who posited that when Jesus woke up, he didn't say, peace, be still. What he really said was, don't worry about it, guys, this is about to blow over. And as soon as he said that, it blew over. And it just was coincidental that Jesus said something and then the storm died down. And so trying to explain away the miracle of Jesus. But I gotta wonder, isn't it just as miraculous if Jesus said it's going to soon be over and then it is? That's like me saying it's going to be great weather for 5 days of vacation Bible school and then it was. Here's an interesting quote that I saw this week. A guy named David Garland said, "A miracle is a miracle only if God speaks to us through it." And Frederick Buechner said, "A miracle is an event that strengthens faith." And so as I think about Jesus calming the storm, it's a miracle because it does something to their faith. And even more, for us to try to explain away this miracle because we know nature only acts in a certain way, maybe we need to rethink that. You see, we are caught up in an environment where we think that nothing is real unless it's quantifiable, measurable, has an empirical result, and it can be repeated. So, for example, if I took an object and I held it out and I let go, what's it going to do? It's going to fall. If I pick that object up again and I let it go from down here, what's it going to do? It's going to fall. If I get up on top of the roof and I have that object and I let it go, what's it going to do? No matter what I do, when I let it go, it's going to fall down. And so we've discovered that this must be true, that what goes up must come down. And Isaac Newton figured that out several hundred years ago. And people thought, this is it. This is the way the universe works. Until this guy early in the 20th century came along and he came up with a different idea. And people said, whoa, you're crazy. And he kind of looked crazy. His hair was kind of everywhere. And he said, there's something more than just gravity. In fact, it's all relative. And he created the theory of relativity. Do you know who I'm talking about? Albert Einstein. And because Albert Einstein came along, everything that we thought we knew about nature from Isaac Newton had to change. Now, who are we to say that we know everything about nature? But if God created everything that we have, and it was done through Jesus, which is what the Scriptures tell us, then isn't it possible that Jesus knows something about nature so that when He rebukes the waves and He tells the wind to peace, be still, He's doing something with nature. It might be supernatural, but it is not unnatural. So what does this miracle mean for us? How can we apply this lesson to our lives today? Well, I was listening to a podcast this week from NPR called TED Radio. Anybody ever listen to TED Radio? These are TED Talks, and they have the person who's doing that talk on the radio, and they interview them. And there was this one person who talked about how we are in a world that is seeking our attention. And our attention is a commodity that is being competed over all the time. And she gave an example of how YouTube works to try to keep us watching video after video after video on YouTube. If you search for a video and you find the video you want to watch, you get that video, but then there's down the side a list of other videos that YouTube suggests that you watch next. And so then you click on one of those other videos and it becomes the main video, and there's a new list of videos to watch next. And then you'll click on one of those and it gives that one up, and there's a new list, and then another one and a new list, and another one and a new list. And YouTube is trying to keep your attention, keeping you watching those videos, because that's how they get their money, by your eyeball. Now, the woman on the TED Talk talked about the algorithm that YouTube uses to keep our attention going. Every time you get a fresh list, it's slightly more provocative of a list than what was before. So the videos are going to be slightly more out there, and then slightly more out there, and then slightly more out there, slightly more extreme as you keep going, because they want to keep enticing you to watch a new video. So how does this work? Well, let's say it's back in the last election cycle, and you click on a Bernie Sanders campaign video. From the Bernie Sanders video, you get a new list, and you click on another thing, and then on another thing, on another thing, and before you know it, you are deep into a left-wing, weird, wild, wacky universe. On the other hand, if you click on a Donald Trump, and then another Donald Trump, and then another one, and then another one, and then another one, you're going to very soon wind up in a weird, wacky, right-wing, crazy, it does not make sense universe. And so YouTube is constantly pushing us into the wild and the weird and the wacky to keep our eyeballs, but as a result, we end up being a divided people, and we are in a storm of craziness. With Facebook, I've been doing the daily devotion videos for just about a month now. And a side effect of doing these videos is now I'm suddenly paying a whole lot more attention to Facebook. You see, Facebook gives you notifications whenever something happens related to a post that you've made. And I was used to having 4, 5, 6 Facebook notifications a day. Now that I'm doing these videos, I'm getting 30, 40, 60, 80 notifications, and I'm like, whoa, what's going on? And so I'll go out there for 20 seconds to see what's happening, and I'll see that so-and-so has liked this, and so-and-so has said this, and so-and-so has done that. And then before I know it, I'm checking on all these other things they're doing, and 20 seconds has turned into 25 minutes. We are told that for young adults today, their phones give them some kind of a notification every 7 seconds. how in the world can we get anything done when we're being interrupted every 7 seconds? My friends, we have created in our world today the perfect storm to pull our attention in every direction. And is it any wonder that we are going crazy? And Jesus is looking at us and saying, my friend, don't you care that you're drowning? Peace. Be still. If we want a miracle in our lives, we need to step back and let the peace of Christ calm our storms. Just like the song says, when the storms of life are raging, Jesus, stand by me. You see, Jesus doesn't keep us out of the storm. Jesus is with us through the storm. Peace, be still. Amen. Well, normally I would send you off at this point, but I think there's some kids who are really looking forward to something, so I'm going to invite you all to have a seat. I'm going to invite Chris Bird to come down, and Nora, you can go ahead and step down. So let me explain to you what's happening here. If you look over here to your left, there's this table full of school supplies. And the challenge was for the kids to bring in enough school supplies, and if they did, then I would get a pie in the face. Well, after the second night, I was getting a pie in the face.
Yes, you were.
And so we upped the ante and said, okay, if you can bring in this much more, then Miss Marshmallow, also known as Marcia, would also get a pie in the face. And then if we had enough kids who showed up today, which they have, then a third person would get a pie. So come on down, and we're going to have 3 pies in the face. And I'm going to have to be last, so who wants to be first? No, I was the first to be willing to take the pie. But I'm going to be the last face you see get the pie. All right, so I'm going to take the microphone off because I know Miss Tina does not want pie on the microphone.
Don't walk. Don't walk. Don't walk. Yeah. Please don't do that.